Steve, real quick before we begin, the single biggest thing I've learned about succeeding as an ADHD entrepreneur is that everything boils down to mastering your weeks. So if ADHD is making business harder than it needs to be, I've got something that can help. Grab my free weekly ADHD dashboard. It's a free, simple, but powerful tool to help you stay focused, organized, and in control of your week. The link is in the description below. Well, hey there, and welcome back to the podcast, ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator. I'm Steve August. Good to have you with me for this episode. It's just a solo episode and sharing some quick thoughts and some tips. The idea of discipline and ADHD and being an ADHD entrepreneur. Now, the reason this came to mind was because I had a client come to me and I asked him, what do you think you need that isn't there that we could put in place? And he said, I need more discipline. I need to just be more disciplined. I see other entrepreneurs out there and I see that, they have a way of executing and doing stuff. And this person was feeling challenged around that and had come to the conclusion that it was essentially a discipline deficit, if you want to shorten it to that. And I'm not going to say discipline isn't involved in figuring out how to get unstuck or move forward or get into action or stop procrastinating or make good on all the brilliance that you have as an ADHD entrepreneur. But I will say this, is that discipline and willpower are a finite thing. They are a limited supply for any person, but especially for ADHD brains, right? Because that is something that discipline and willpower have a certain capacity. And an ADHD brain, where there's less executive function to work with, that capacity will get used up a lot faster, right? So if we think about what are the components of executive function, things like impulse control, things like task initiation, things like emotional regulation, time blindness, working memory, these are all things that make it a little bit more challenging to start and to decide, to prioritize, to do, to sustain. And these are all things that we need to do, obviously, as to be a successful entrepreneur. And so discipline and willpower can help us push through that, right? But those are limited in supply. And the other challenge then is if ADHD pushes willpower and discipline harder than, say, somebody who maybe has higher executive function, then we use it up faster, but we also start comparing ourselves to other folks who, don't have to have their discipline and willpower work so hard, right? So the trap is we end up thinking it's a character defect or a flaw. And I'm not saying discipline isn't important. I'm not saying willpower isn't needed. But if you bring everything back to, hey, I just need more of that discipline, more of that willpower, that is not going to serve you as well as saying, hey, I've got this type of brain and it is brilliant at these types of things. It is brilliant at ideating, creating, and knowing and learning and dreaming. And it's underpowered when it comes to doing. I've got that kind of brain. I've still got the same amount of willpower. How can I better work with my brain and to support it and put it in positions to succeed versus saying, I just got to, try to access or increase more discipline and willpower. Okay, so what do I mean by this? How do we make that tangible, right? It's all well and good to say, don't use more willpower and discipline, just work more with your brain. So here's what I mean by that. So we want to basically say and look at it so that we are giving our brain the best chance to do the things that we want it to do, right? We want to be able to start the things that are important to us. We want to be able to focus in. We sometimes need to do that when we're not as interested in the subject, or we need to do that well in advance of the consequences, because ADHD brains get motivated by two things, right? Intense interest and intense consequences. And those things aren't always available. And the most important things often, work best when we're not relying on those things, urgency and interest. And so that's why we want to put ourselves in place to utilize our willpower and discipline in the most strategic way, right? We've got a limited supply of it. So what is it? What is the way that we can strategically deploy our willpower and discipline? So here's an example, right? So we know we have something we want to do. It's really important to moving our business forward, and we got to get it done. So one thing that I teach people is let's set the environment, the best possible environment for getting things done. So what does that mean? So the willpower on getting things done is better deployed on essentially, like we'll go through the different aspects of environment. Let's talk about your digital environment. Your willpower is best deployed on turning off all your notifications and quitting all the apps except the one you're working on, versus trying to resist the pull, the lure of repeated notifications. If we have a limited amount of discipline and willpower, let's deploy that in avoiding getting bombarded with notifications versus having to resist each notification as it comes through. That's what I mean by an example of strategically deploying discipline and willpower. So one of the things I teach is about the 2-hour workday. And if you can integrate that with co-working, which is like a magic bullet for getting out of procrastination and distraction, you can co-work during your 2-hour, peak executive function. We want to have the discipline to show up for the co-working sessions, or we want to have the discipline to start the things when our executive function is at its peak versus waiting till later on and then having to use more willpower and discipline to try to stay on task. So setting the environment, setting the place where you deploy your discipline and willpower is more important than the quantity of it. There's only so much. One of the things I see this playing out is I have a number of people in the ADHD Entrepreneur Accelerator, and they tend to be a little bit more night owls. That's fine. Some folks do their best work first thing in the morning. Some folks do their best work later in the day or in the evening. But what this person found was that they would get too far into the evening where they would start cutting into their overall sleep. So it would get too late and it would take them too long to wind down. And so the next day would be less productive. So the discipline isn't in necessarily getting up earlier. The discipline is in the night before, is knowing when to cut off and sticking to that particular habit. And sort of the night before discipline often is better than the morning of discipline, because the morning of discipline is subject to, how much sleep you got and all that. So thinking carefully about that, once you start thinking about it, it's hard to stop thinking about it. And I think of it as a kind of a brain first approach versus a productivity approach. You get to the same place, but you do it in a way that supports your brain. The last thing I would say about that is also just the environment of who you're around, the environment of your physical space. All of these things are places where you can deploy your discipline and willpower so that you get the better impact, so you get the most mileage from it. And so that's the big takeaway for today is you don't need more discipline. It's about understanding how your brain works, when you've got the best chance of executing and delivering on the things and that you really know will be most impactful, and then deploying that discipline and willpower strategically so that you get the most out of it. And play with that and see how it helps you out, because I think that was something that really hit home for me when I realized if I think about my brain first and think about what it needs and how it works and make it about, hey, my way of doing this is to work better with my brain, use my discipline and willpower so that I get the most out of it, it changes how you approach almost everything. So that's a thought for this episode. Hope it's valuable to you. If it is, boy, I'd appreciate you giving the episode a 5-star rating or a thumbs up, or subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube. And if you do have a moment to give a review, would love to have it. Help spread the word. I'm working to support as many ADHD entrepreneurs as I can. And every episode that gets recommended, starred, liked, it helps the cause. So thanks for being here and listening, and we'll see you real soon.